What is up, guys? Tyson Dela Cruz here. Thank you so much for rocking with me. We all remember that infamous interview with Dana Bash and Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. Took them 40-something odd days to do this interview, and it was only 18 minutes long. Kamala Harris only spoke 16 minutes. Tim Walz spoke 2 minutes. And in this exclusive interview with Dana Bash and Medialite, she exposes some interesting, to say the least, truths about what actually happened. Kamala Harris and her, shall we say, unique ability to give the most clear answers ever. I mean, like, clear as mud, right? According to CNN, Dana Bash, Harris has a bit of a habit of dodging tough questions, especially when it comes to her flip-flopping policies. So how does Harris navigate through these tricky situations? Easy. By not really answering them at all. Shout out to everybody watching. Drop your comments down below. We're going to jump into this exclusive interview with Medialite and Dana Bash. This is the first time that she does a sit-down interview after the infamous Walz and Harris CNN interview. Let's jump in.
I talk about your interview with Vice President Kamala Harris and her running mate, Tim Walz. You secured the first interview with them since she ascended to the top of the ticket, and it created a lot of conversation. What were your impressions of Harris and Walz in that interview?
My impression was that these are two people who are still in the early days of their relationship, trying to figure out, and in the early days of their candidacy, each of them trying to figure out how to navigate it. Every day is like 12 news cycles, and it's been like that for the past 8 years. But
I want to stop it right there, because that right there states that they are still trying to figure ish out. They don't have it figured out. So how can somebody go on a debate stage? She's going on a debate stage here soon. How can somebody go on a debate stage and not have your ish figured out?
It's easy to quickly forget that even though she has been vice president for almost 4 years, and she has been in public service, she was obviously a senator, AG, so on and so forth. This is the kind of thing when you run for president that once you get to this time in the calendar, you have been through your paces,
right? And
you have your reps. Whether it is well, first of all, you have the votes from the people who are voting in your party. And the Biden-Harris ticket had the votes, but not her. But just in terms of what it takes to be a successful candidate, you have a lot of time, not just to sort of learn the performance and feel comfortable with doing an interview, which actually she did a lot more interviews during the Biden-Harris campaign.
I'm going to cut through this interview because I want to comment it as we're going along, but she just said clearly right there, I'm going to rewind it. I'm not going to do this the entire video, guys. I'm going to let it run through, but I just want to make some valid points here because something really stood out for me.
The Biden-Harris ticket had the votes, but not her. But just in terms of what it takes to be a successful candidate.
That right there, what it takes to be a successful candidate. Clearly, she does not have that. She does not have that. Let me know if you guys agree with that. Drop it in the chat. I'm going to let this run. Let me know if you guys agree with that.
You have a lot of time, not just to sort of learn the performance and feel comfortable with doing an interview, which actually she did a lot more interviews during the Biden-Harris campaign than people realize, because she just did a lot of it under the radar.
And nobody really
and nobody was paying attention, which is what
attention to Biden,
which is what you kind of want. Yeah. But when it comes to the policies, she's still quickly she was shot out of a cannon. So she's trying to figure out, what do I want to stick with him on? What do I not? She, for the most part, didn't want to have any daylight with Biden on policies, which I understand.
So the thing that stuck out to me most, and this might be a little harsh on Harris and Walz, but she seemed to have a hard time answering the obvious questions that she was going to get in this first interview. She struggled to say what she would do on day one. She had a sort of evasive answer when you asked her about fracking. And Walz, I thought too, his answer on suggesting that he had served in combat was sort of evasive. He said, "I speak candidly," which is obviously he didn't speak candidly. That was the whole problem. Did you get a sense that they were ready for these kinds of questions? And, this is, obviously Kamala Harris is going to have a debate next week with Trump. I feel like she's going to need to have better answers going forward if she has any chance of success.
Well, on fracking, and, if you just came from the moon and you say, why is she asking about this very specific, very sort of micro question? But we all know why I asked the question, because she has to win Pennsylvania, and this is like table stakes in Pennsylvania. I actually thought she was really clear. Like she said, I will not ban fracking.
Right.
What I think what she was less clear about, and maybe what you're getting at, is how she got there.
Why she changed.
Yes.
Because you had to ask twice.
Yeah.
You had to ask it multiple times, questions twice, because the answers weren't necessarily answering the question. They were answering what they wanted the question to be, which is often what politicians do. But it came off as a little evasive at times, I thought.
And that's why I wanted to ask the broader question, which is, if you've changed your position on X, Y, and Z, how can you assure voters that those positions won't change again once they elect you?
Right.
Which I do think, a lot of liberals are like, oh, you're asking Republican talking points. But that's like a fundamental question that if I'm a swing voter, I want to know the answer to. If I'm not sure if I'm going to vote for Trump or Harris or not vote at all, that's something that will inform my vote.
There's also a difference between what every candidate in the history of American politics has done, which is run to please a base in a primary and then move to the center in a general election. Harris's, the way she ran in 2020 feels, and the way she's running now, feels a little more extreme than that, I would say. Not extreme in terms of policy, just the turn is a little bit.
The differences?
Yeah.
And I think, again, this is in part because, well, there are two dynamics at play here. Number one, the 2020 Democratic race was in the middle of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, and it was also after the Democrats did extremely well in the midterm before that and elected a lot of very progressive, very liberal Democrats.
Right.
And so that's where the kind of the zeitgeist was in the Democratic Party. I'm not defending it, I'm explaining it. And then you have Harris.
She is skating on thin ice. She's being somewhat elusive here as well. I think, my personal opinion, simply because she works for CNN. She is an anchor for CNN, and she has strong ties with Harris. And she doesn't want to exploit too much of how poor of a candidate Harris actually is.
Harris quickly have to absorb and be a part of not her own positions, but Joe Biden's, because he was the president. And so that's why it's the contrasting where she has been with Joe Biden, who was elected because he wasn't like those other Democrats who were running against him. He was perceived as more moderate. You can argue whether he governed like that, but that's how he got elected. And she has been part of that administration. So trying to suss out what she would do now that she's the boss and now that she's in charge is really the key.
Yeah. Now, as is often the case these days, whenever there's a big high-profile interview like this, you took some heat from the left, as you noted, some heat from the right. What did you make of that criticism? I mean, the right, their problem was that you didn't necessarily, they felt, hold her down on some of her more nebulous policy positions. What would you say to that?
I think you just said, I tried. Right. I mean, you can't force somebody to answer a question. And I asked to follow up. I tried to get more into the nitty gritty and get the answer. And sometimes, I mean, my experience in doing interviews is that once you ask once, fine, twice, fine, three times, if you don't get it as a clear answer, that's kind of your answer.
Yeah, it was one
right there. Finito burrito. Fool me once, ask once, fool me once. Shame on you, or whatever that saying is. I don't, fool me once, fool me twice, fool me twice, whatever the scenario is. But she asked a series of times, and she's saying that the third time she didn't have a lucrative answer. And that right there is the answer.
My next question, actually, how persistent do you feel like you should be in these kind of interviews where you're speaking with a vice president or a presidential candidate? Did you ask 10 times if you need to, or does it depend on the question?
It totally depends on the question, on the place you are in the calendar, on the importance of it. There are a million factors.
This next question is interesting on how Ms. Bash answers it as well, because Kamala Harris has been so elusive with the media. She hasn't sat down with anybody aside from Ms. Bash and CNN on a heavily scripted, heavily cut interview. Let's jump into that.
Obviously, there was a lot of pressure on Harris to do an interview, which he hadn't done until yours. And there's that pressure's, I assume, going to continue because we've got 66 days or so left. And do you think that the Harris campaign is going to continue to be at least interview averse going forward? And do you think that's a mistake for them?
I don't think that they're going to be interview averse.
Okay.
I don't, because I think that they understand, and she understands, that it's important. And now the focus is on the debate. They wanted to get one done before the debate. And, even though it seems like it was a very long time, and I think on paper, and it was many, many days between when she announced and when she secured the nomination, and those 24 hours, and she sat down for an interview, because of the unusual circumstances, you could make the argument, like if one was running her campaign, that the longer you wait, the higher the stakes.
Yes.
And just to have just done little ones, do local interviews,
Right.
They didn't do that for whatever reason. But I do think she'll do more.
Yeah. And Trump, obviously, have to be fair about this. I think people get the impression that he does a lot of press because he does a ton of interviews on podcasts that are very popular, but that aren't with real journalists. Do you think he's going to sit down for an interview between now and the election, or does he just not have to because nobody in his audience cares? He can do the Fox phoners, he can do a Theo Vaughn interview, but he doesn't have to do CNN.
I think
this answer is really good because she speaks about Trump's base and where he's at and what he's trying to reach. I thought it was a good answer. Let me know what you guys think.
I think that the Trump campaign, and he understands that, he's got his base. He needs to broaden out.
Right.
And it's that push and pull between what his campaign wants him to talk about, policy, and what he actually says, which is some policy, but it gets drowned out by the other stuff that he says. But I take your point. I mean, yes, he does sit down and talk to people, but in some ways, maybe it's a bit of an unfair.
Right.
I don't want to call it a canard, but because we as reporters want them to sit down with reporters all the time. But it is true that there's an impression that he sits down with reporters maybe more than he actually sits down with people like you and me.
Right. I want to talk about the upcoming debate.
Okay.
And you obviously hosted the first CNN debate with Jake Tapper, which was probably the most consequential debate in a presidential cycle. And
he goes on to ask Ms. Bash about the debate and what she saw because she hosted it. And she saw the immediate crumbling of the Democratic Party as well of the crumbling of Joe Biden.
recent memory. I can't think back to a one that was more consequential. Just thinking back to that debate, and I know this is a little bit of an old question, but when you were watching what was happening up on stage, were you thinking
what you were thinking?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Totally.
Joe Biden is
like, what is happening?
right.
Like, what is happening?
I am lost for words on this one because Dana Bash, she clearly just exposed all of the holes in the boat with the Harrison Walz campaign and the crumbling of the Democratic Party at the debate with Joe Biden. Interesting stuff, guys. Let me know what you guys think of this. Drop your comments down below, smash the like button, share, subscribe, and as always, I'll catch you on the next one.